So, welcome back to part 4. Part 4 handles the post-install tasks that I do after installing the hypervcluster. In this case, since we also have scaleio, it's configuring the scaleio, mdms, and some other stuff. So, first of all, we look at the installation time. It took like 23 minutes to do a complete deployment of a 3-node hypervcluster. The first thing that I normally do is I go to the DC node and go to computers and do a refresh, and I see I have my failover cluster and I have the 3 nodes that are being installed. Then I go to the first node and I launch the failover cluster manager from here. Oopsie. Failover cluster manager, and the failover cluster manager will also tell me some details about my cluster. So the cluster is configured with a file share witness, which is on the labbuildr domain controller, labbuildr DC. It currently has no roles in, but it has 3 nodes in, and they are all up and running. When it comes to storage, there's currently no storage in the system. If we open the PowerShell and do, for instance, a get disk, just for information, we see there are 3 disks configured, 3 additional disks with 100 GB in size. Those are the disks I will use for creating the scaleio. So I do a cd to scripts. And under scripts there is a script called configure-mdm. If no parameters are passed, the script will automatically configure the MDM with 3 virtual volumes. All 3 volumes will be mapped to the cluster, and the standard password for all the admin passwords will be set for the MDM. You can specify your own number of CSVs, you can specify your own password, and you can use the -verbose switch. If -verbose is passed, the configure-mdm will stop after each task, showing and telling you what it's actually doing. If you don't specify any switch, it uses the defaults. So that's what we do right now. Configure-mdm starts. Successfully created the primary MDM. You will see once we create the volume, it will be automatically to be appeared in the cluster. So we format it and add it to the cluster, and then we move it to the cluster shared volumes. This may take a few seconds, and then the new drive is available under disks. We do this for all 3 drives that we wanted to configure, and then we have a scaleio cluster with 3 scaleio volumes attached that we can fail over between each and every cluster node. So right now we are waiting for the 3rd disk to be popped up, and you see the 3 disks are also distributed across all 3 cluster nodes, so we can simply test by moving the disks between the cluster node. So we select the node and we move it just to node 1, and we may, for instance, move that disk here to node 3 and move that disk here to node 2. So we see everything can move fine within the cluster. So that was the first script that we use. A second script that we may want to use is, because we right now have a cluster built. Oh, by the way, we could also hook in the scaleio GUI, so we can connect to the scaleio GUI and see that everything is nicely set up and done. We have the protection domain labbuildr with all my 3 cluster nodes with the 3 physical disks per each cluster that we then configure for 3 volumes. You see here outlined 3 volumes are mapped, so everything is currently fine and smooth. What I will do right now, I move the first disks again to the first node back, okay, because that's how I want to have it. In order to run virtual machines within the cluster, we could download a standard virtual machine from Microsoft, for instance, Windows Server 2012 R2. That would be one of those virtual machines that we could run. To integrate those ones in the Hyper-V cluster, I added, if we look at the get child item, if we do a get child item, there is a script that's called new-clusteredvm. If we don't run it with parameters, it will automatically look for a standard VM that I have in my sources library for the Windows evaluation version, and will install this one, new clustered VM minus verbose. So I run this with the switch minus verbose. You might want to specify your VM name, your source VHD, and your cluster volume where you want to put it. It's automatically distributed into cluster volume 1. So I start that script, and what it's going to import is the 9660/415 AMD FreeWin Blue refresh. That's the server data center evaluation VHD. If you put this into your source directory, under the folder sources Hyper-V, it will import that virtual machine. So once he's done with the virtual machine, we will go on and configure network, or we can do this right now. So we go to our networker server and do some configuration work right now. So if we go to networker, that's the one we installed earlier. We have not set up devices. What you could do is go to your devices and mount and label the advanced file type device. So we label it and we say mount it after label. So we have a volume in the drive now. What we also could do, this is in my environment, we go in the new device wizard for data domain, and we create a new data domain device. We need the ddboost user, so we have to add the data domain system name, and the data domain system name is ddvenode1.labbuildr.local, and this will be added. I have in my, if we go to DNS settings on my domain controller and we look in here, I have reserved some names. So if you follow those standards, or you might change them to match your ones. I have here DDVE node 1 to 3, and I have Avamar nodes included. I have a cloud array and a cloud boost enabled. So if you follow those names, you could be easily set this one up. So the username for me is ddboost in my environment, and the password is password123. And now he's going to catch the virtual data domain. So while he's trying this, we could also again look in my scaleio UI and see, okay, there's some I/O going on because we are actively importing right now the 8 gigs of virtual machine into that environment. It might be finished soon. We can have a look at the script. Yeah, it's already done. So it's faster than I thought. So if we go to roles, we have a new virtual machine up and running on Hyper-V node 1 that's called hvvm1. So once the system has discovered my data domain, it detects that it all was already connected to a previous networker installation. I just use the same storage paths and make the device name a little bit shorter. And I use the storage path /networker, so it's going to be overwritten and relabeled. And I also changed the default pool name to something that's a little bit shorter here. So we create a new pool, and this pool is for normal backups. We click next. And then we can issue the community string. The community string I configured within networker is networker, so there's a default configuration for SNMP that uses the networker community string. If you set this up on your data domain, it will pretty good run with SNMP if set up correctly. So now he's verifying and writing the volume label. Since it was already in use of networker, I'm going to relabel it, and then our data domain is integrated into this environment. So once he's importing the one, we are going to configure the NMM environment. So for networker modules to Microsoft, in order to run perfectly, we need to set up some user privileges. So on the local machine and on the cluster, a backup user must be part of the local admins, and the backup user must be part of the cluster admins group. And he needs to have the backup rights and some other rights. I have a script that, let's do a get child item here again. I provide a script that allows us to set those rights like we want to have. And we just started from one of the cluster nodes, and the script is called create-csvbackupuser. So what we have to do here is we run create-csvbackupuser, and we give it a password for the user, and it's also password 123 because it's easy to remember. And we specify a backup admin, and we call it hyperv backup user. We have to remember it because this user will be added to the domain and will be added to the local groups. And I do verbose though that you can see what happens in that script. So I connect to the Active Directory. I add the Hyper-V backup user to the remote backup to the remote desktop users. I connect him to the cluster and I add him to the cluster, and I add him to various groups. And I do this for every node. Once I'm done with it, that user has the appropriate rights. We can also check on the cluster. If we go to properties and we go to cluster permissions, that user right now is in the cluster, which saves a lot of headaches. So this one is in right now. So that's the first thing that we need to set. The second thing, this user also must be part of networkers application administrators group in order to backups and restores. So this one is finished here. We can close that wizard. On the networker server, we also can launch a PowerShell, and we go to cd /scripts, and there's another script. Get it's called add-nsr user, and for add-nsr user we have to add the backup user, and it's called Hyper-V backup user. That's the one we just added here, Hyper-V backup user. That's the domain user. We take this user, Hyper-V backup user, and use the host prefix HV for Hyper-V. So all nodes called Hyper-V something will then be added to the networker group, and we do this with minus verbose. So you see the commands going. Hyper-V user at host Hyper-V node 1.labbuildr.local is been added to the administrative list, and the system is added. So we do this for everyone, for Hyper-V backup user, for system, and the administrator of this node, and then we are set and done to run NMM backups in the future. So once this is done, we go to configuration. So we currently don't have any client configured other than the networker server itself. So we go and configure a new client. So we launch new client wizard. A new client wizard asks us first for the name, and we use the name of our cluster. It's called HV cluster. It's a traditional networker backup. We click next. What happens now is networker resolves the name of the cluster, gets to the node that is currently the active owner of the cluster, and detects all the that Hyper-V is installed on the system. You can see networker client version 8.2.1.0 build 681. We have to accept this VeriSign message. Now I will get asked if I want to have a data domain backup. Yes, and the target pool is DDV node 1. So we do next. And now networker is going to run an NSRVSS snapsave to figure out what are the Hyper-V client backup objects, and some other thing. This might take a few moments depending on your cluster size, on your network speed, and how busy your virtual machine is. So we give them a few minutes. I will cut this down, I guess. So, and once NSRVSS snap save is done, we can see that we have a Hyper-V cluster, and it consists of those nodes, and it shows me what are the cluster shared volumes and the Hyper-V components. And you also might see that I have installed a virtual machine on each node locally. That's not part of the cluster, it's just a machine with a disk with no operating system, and you might want to use it, move it to the cluster. So next is, we're getting asked if we want to force a VSS full backup from within the virtual machine, so that in-guest VSS will be leveraged through the with the integration utils. We add all proxy servers. We will get to this later on in the next session when we run an analysis of the backup. We click next here, and we just use the standard browse policy and retention policy, and we create a new group, and the new group that we use here is hv_dd, which means Hyper-V backup to the data domain. Client retries, we don't want to have a retry, because if it fails, it fails. It's not good for the test of that many retries. Important, rollover only is the snapshot policy that we use. And we back up to the network server only in this part, and that's it. So we have a PSOL list, the preferred list for backups. I will get to this list later on if we analyze a backup. So I click on create, and we are finished. So what I will do next, I go to the Hyper-V cluster resource, double click, and go to apps and modules. On remote user, I type in Hyper-V backup user at labbuildr.local. Oops, I'm missing an L in here, and the password is, as we already want to. Sorry for that. Yay. And the password is password123, and I click OK. The last thing that I do is I go to media, go to my media pools, DDVE node 1, and make sure that hvdd is allowed to write to that media pool, because I'm no longer writing to the default media pool. So if we go to our group that was created right now, hvdd, I can click on the hvdd group and see it will use the default snapshot pool, rollover only, and my backups will be then done to the data domain. I just, clicked the wrong one. I want to go in here. So, and this one is going to write to the DDVE pool, DDVE node 1. So, the schedule is default. What we do right now is we start an ad hoc backup, and we click on start. Do you want to start the group hv_d? And I say yes. As I said, I have some helpers installed for those people who are interested in watching the backup. I have a script that's called watch backup events or watch cluster backup that analyzes just the VSS and networker events in the event log. So I start watch cluster backup. It opens 3 windows, 1 window for each node of the cluster, and we can actually browse and see how the cluster backup works. And you will see that that NMM talks to the current cluster owner. That's the one he is throwing his commands through. Will analyze the cluster config and do some stuff before he actually starts snapshotting and all that stuff. So it's interesting just looking in here what happens during each phase of the backup. So we go back to networker server, and do a double click here as well, where we can see the details of the backup. So nothing is in here right now, and we also might to look at the logs that are down below here. Right now he says, okay, unable to find any full backups, so we've never done a backup before for that Hyper-V cluster, and he knows that he has to perform a full backup. So we open this again, and now it takes a few moments. We are running the SafeSet Microsoft applications Microsoft Hyper-V full. That means we have to do the complete software VSS stack, talking to the backup writers and make sure where the elements of the CSV backup sit. So as we can see from the logs, the job handler is starting on HV node 2, which might be an indicator that HV node 2 is the current owner of the cluster. We might check this one. If we look at the cluster, so it's on HV node 2, so that's a good indication. That's the entrance point. If we talk to the cluster, we always talk to the current owner. That's where the job handler starts creating the backup jobs, and from there he will most likely jump to the volume that's currently the owner of the cluster shared volume, where the volume to be backed up is currently sitting. So it's not backing up from the node where the virtual machine is running. It's backing up from the node owning or being currently the owner of the cluster shared volume. According to this might be node 1, because NMM is creating the replica on node 1. So if we again look into the cluster admin and we look at storage disks, we know it is on node 1, and I just moved all the storage to node 1 earlier as we flipped them around a little bit. So currently the backup is running from node 1, the application is on node 1, and the disk is owned by node 1. So that's why it's choosing the node 1 for the backup of this one. So if we go to Networker, we can see here the snapshot processing in the event log of Networker, and it requested a snapshot, it completed a snapshot. What's next? He will do the mount process. We might want to monitor the mount process on the Networker server if we want. So we could issue some stuff like mount wall or other stuff to see what gets mounted. Like here, a snapshot is imported for cluster storage volume 1. So we go to the Networker server and run a Windows PowerShell, do a mount wall, and it will show me that there's something mounted into program files, EMC Networker NSR temp. That's the mount path for this volume right now from my cluster storage volume 1 that gets mounted here as well. So this is only for information. If you want to debug Networker or want to see what happens during a backup, this might be an indicator of where to look at. So the backup is running. So he has mounted the stuff, and we have to wait for it to transfer the data to the data domain. I will let the backup now here where it is and leave it running, and we'll talk about this in a later part, in part 5. This was so far how to configure the Hyper-V cluster after we installed it. What we did was configure scaleio, we configured Networker, we configured NMM, we configured the appropriate rights we need in the cluster, so everything is up and running now fine. I will come back after the backup is done, showing you the results.